On February 28, 2026, the world's busiest international aviation hub suspended its normal rhythm. Flights disappeared from departure boards. Dubai International Airport reported damage, and one of the city's most recognizable luxury symbols was struck by interception debris. The physical damage was limited, but the economic interruption was not. Dubai had just completed the strongest tourism year in its history. Within 2 weeks, weekly hotel occupancy fell to 22.8%. The skyline remained illuminated. The hotels remained cooled. The pools continued circulating water. Staff still reported for work. But the aircraft and guests that made those systems profitable had stopped arriving at their normal scale. The attacks did not flatten Dubai, but they exposed something more important. They exposed a luxury economy built around a continuous flow it could not independently guarantee. The disruption began in the sky. Within days, it had reached hotel rooms, restaurants, workers, investors, and the government itself. To understand the scale of the disruption, it is necessary to measure the momentum of the system right before it stopped. Dubai entered 2026 with unprecedented operational strength. The city received 19.59 million international overnight visitors in 2025. During that same year, average hotel occupancy reached 80.7%. Dubai International Airport managed a record volume of passenger traffic, securing its position as a central node in global aviation. This success was not a statistical illusion or a marketing claim. The city genuinely moved millions of people through highly efficient terminals, luxury hotels, and massive commercial centers. To process 19.59 million visitors, the system requires an astonishing daily rhythm. Every single day, tens of thousands of people must land, clear immigration, find transport, and check into hundreds of high-rise hotels. It means restaurants must import fresh ingredients daily, and desalination plants must push millions of gallons of fresh water into the grid to meet consumption spikes. But the anti-luxury argument focuses on the exact conditions required to maintain that momentum. The entire economic machine demanded continuous aviation. It required high international occupancy to cover enormous fixed costs. It depended on premium spending and persistent investor confidence. The expensive infrastructure only made financial sense if it remained fully utilized. When a city builds massive infrastructure, it creates an enormous baseline of energy and maintenance demands. Those demands do not pause when demand fluctuates. The air conditioning systems must continue to reject heat, and the workforce must be maintained to deliver the expected 5-star experience. Dubai's vulnerability did not come from failing to attract demand. It came from building so much of the city around the assumption that demand could never be interrupted for long. The system was optimized for maximum throughput. It was not optimized for a sudden external pause. It was an economic firewall built on the premise that regional instability would always stop at the border. The pause arrived through a precise sequence of verifiable events. On February 28, 2026, regional attacks initiated a sudden shift in the geopolitical environment. United Arab Emirates airspace and airport operations faced immediate disruption as military events intersected with commercial flight corridors. Dubai International Airport reported damage, forcing an unexpected halt to one of the most highly synchronized logistics networks on Earth. On the same day, Burj Al Arab experienced a minor exterior fire caused by intercepted debris. Standard flight schedules were abruptly suspended. The immediate visual of the crisis was not a destroyed city, but a frozen departure board. Civil aviation authorities prioritize immediate passenger safety over economic schedules, acting long before a direct hit occurs. As regional airspace became restricted, The intricate map of global flight corridors was suddenly rewritten. Flights en route to Dubai had to calculate whether they had enough fuel to divert to alternative hubs in Europe or Asia. On March 1st and the following days, major international airlines canceled or rerouted their services. Aircraft on the ground were held at their gates as airlines awaited security clearances. The resulting logistical tangle meant that even when the skies eventually reopened, the aircraft and the crews were completely out of position. The highly tuned roster cycles that airlines depend on were shattered in hours. Travelers experienced sudden delays, diversions, and complete uncertainty over when normal departures would resume. News agencies, including Reuters and the Associated Press, reported airport closures, damaged Gulf hubs, and large-scale passenger disruption. Tourism demand began reacting almost immediately to the sudden change in perceived risk. The military reality of the event was brief and localized. The economic reality was a sudden loss of predictability. The decisive change was not physical destruction. It was that travelers and companies could no longer assume the city would remain operational, regardless of events elsewhere in the region. Dubai had long marketed itself as a secure oasis, completely insulated from regional volatility. That insulation was the core product being sold to tourists, expatriates, and foreign investors. When airspace closed and interception debris fell within city limits, that core product was temporarily compromised. The primary product Dubai sold to the world was frictionless mobility and absolute safety. Within 48 hours, both of those guarantees had been suspended. The suspension of that mobility revealed a structural reality about Dubai's aviation dominance. The city operated one of the most advanced airport facilities on the planet. It possessed world-class terminals, highly trained logistics personnel, and efficient baggage handling systems. But the international aviation network is a domino system. Dubai airports could manage its physical terminals, runways, and ground logistics perfectly. It could not independently reopen restricted regional airspace. It could not compel international airlines to immediately restore capacity through a contested flight corridor. It could not instantly realign aircraft, crews, passengers, and routes that had been displaced across the globe. Dubai controlled the airport, but it did not control the airspace network that gave the airport its value. The measured consequence appeared in the passenger data for the first quarter of 2026. During that period, Dubai International Airport handled 18.6 million passengers. This was compared with 23.4 million during the first quarter of 2025. A drop of 4.8 million passenger movements does not mean every single one was a lost tourist. Many were transit passengers simply using Dubai as a connecting node between Europe and Asia. But in a system built on extreme volume, that drop represented an immense interruption to the flow of capital, consumption, and utilization. The Aviation Authority relies on constant fees to maintain the enormous physical footprint. The aircraft that did not arrive meant those fees were not collected. It meant empty duty-free aisles, where retail spending usually flows 24 hours a day. It meant interrupted supply chains for high-value cargo carried in the bellies of passenger jets. Most importantly, it meant the pipelines supplying the city's luxury hotels had been choked at the source. Without the daily arrival of wide-body aircraft delivering fresh international visitors, the downstream economy began to starve. Dubai's real estate and hospitality sectors are the receiving end of the airport's output. If the airport does not process arrivals, the hotels do not sell rooms, and the shopping malls lose their required foot traffic. The infrastructure was perfectly capable of processing the flow. The problem was that the flow had been cut off by geopolitical forces entirely outside the control of the local operators. This is the moment when extreme connectivity transformed into a rigid economic dependency. When the aviation pipeline choked, the impact moved immediately from the tarmac to the hotel lobby. As the conflict altered the perception of regional safety, leisure tourism reacted with immediate cancellations. Unlike corporate travel, which can sometimes be delayed, leisure travel is highly discretionary. Tourists simply chose to stay home or book alternative destinations that did not carry the sudden risk of airspace closures. According to data recorded by CoStar, the city's weekly hotel occupancy collapsed. By the week ending March 14, 2026, occupancy had fallen to 22.8%. This was a staggering drop from the 80.7% average recorded just months earlier. To understand the scale of that decline, you have to visualize it within a standard property. Imagine a hypothetical 100-room luxury hotel operating at that citywide weekly rate. Approximately 23 rooms would be occupied. The remaining 77 rooms would sit empty. This was not a pandemic lockdown where the city was legally ordered to close its doors. The glass towers were still standing, the lobbies were quiet but open, and the dining sections were prepared for service. The staff were still maintaining active, world-class facilities. Housekeeping still cleaned corridors, and clerks stood ready to process arrivals, but the demand required to sustain them had evaporated. The strongest image of the crisis was not a destroyed hotel. It was a perfectly maintained hotel, consuming money, while most of its rooms produced none. The silence in these spaces was not just an atmospheric shift. It was a massive financial liability. A luxury hotel room is a highly perishable asset. A hotel room night expires the second the sun rises. If it is not sold for a specific night, that potential revenue is lost forever, but the baseline cost of maintaining the room remains exactly the same. When citywide occupancy crashes to 22.8%, the entire financial model of a luxury property begins to fracture. The revenue from 23 rooms cannot cover the immense overhead of the entire building. The property enters a state of negative cash flow, burning through capital reserves to stay open. A budget hotel can dim its lights and cut its overhead when demand falls. It can close entire floors and operate with a skeleton crew. A 5-star property in Dubai cannot do this without fundamentally breaking its brand promise. In the premium hospitality sector, revenue can fall rapidly, but building obligations fall slowly. The physical realities of the extreme desert climate dictate a baseline of constant expenditure. The air conditioning systems are not just for comfort, but for structural preservation. The massive chillers must continue fighting the heat to protect the interiors, regardless of whether a guest is present. If cooling systems are turned off, humidity and thermal stress quickly degrade expensive finishes and premium fabrics. Expansive resort pools must be continuously filtered, and elaborate landscaping requires constant irrigation to survive in the arid environment. The architectural lighting must remain on to project the image of a functioning, elite destination to the outside world. These are massive fixed costs that do not scale down when demand plummets. Furthermore, luxury operators face a strategic dilemma when trying to stimulate demand. If an operator heavily discounts room rates to capture whatever small demand remains, they weaken the exclusivity of the brand. Once a property trains the market to expect deep discounts, restoring the original price point becomes incredibly difficult. Conversely, if they cut visible services to protect cash, they damage the premium experience that justified the original investment. A guest paying for luxury expects full service, even if they are the only guest. The high-end standard becomes a rigid financial burden. The operators were trapped between maintaining an expensive illusion of normalcy and bleeding capital. Every day that occupancy remained near 22% was a day of massive operational losses. Luxury did not cause the geopolitical shock. It increased the cost of absorbing it. The premium nature of the real estate transformed a temporary drop in visitors into an intense financial pressure test. The cost of absorbing the shock eventually extended beyond the tourism sector and reached the broader financial markets. Dubai's real estate and financial sectors are highly sensitive to international sentiment. The city relies on foreign capital flowing into luxury apartments, commercial towers, and equity markets. When the perception of absolute safety was challenged, foreign investor behavior shifted. This was not a complete abandonment of the city or a permanent capital flight. It was a measurable repricing of risk based on the new reality of the region. According to Dubai financial market data, foreign investor flows reversed direction during the reported period of the conflict. Before the February events, the market recorded a year-to-date inflow of $890 million. By June 12th, that shifted to an outflow of $853 million. Investors were actively adjusting their portfolios, pulling back capital, while they assessed whether the airspace closures would become a recurring threat. The rapid shift from a nearly $900 million inflow to an $853 million outflow is a clear metric of sudden risk aversion. In response, Dubai announced a 2.5 billion dirham support package to protect the foundational trust required to keep international capital in the city. This intervention was designed to inject liquidity and signal stability to the international community. This package did not mean the city was bankrupt. It meant that restoring confidence had become an active economic policy task, requiring direct state capital rather than an automatic marketing assumption. There were clear signs that Dubai retained immense financial strength throughout the disruption. Company registrations continued, indicating long-term corporate interest. Major construction projects proceeded without public cancellation, and the markets responded positively whenever regional tensions showed signs of cooling. The city was not destroyed, and its financial system had not ended. But the international investors were demanding a higher premium for the new visible risk. The firewall of complete insulation had been breached, and the price of doing business had to be adjusted. Risk calculation models that previously assigned a zero probability to direct military disruption in Dubai had to be rewritten. The repricing of risk traveled directly down the economic ladder to the people who kept the luxury machine running. When hotel occupancy falls to 22.8%, the immediate human impact is not necessarily a mass layoff event. It is a sudden and severe contraction in the variable economy. Fewer arrivals and empty dining sections mean fewer required shifts for hourly hospitality staff. Restaurants that usually turn tables multiple times suddenly find themselves empty by 9 in the evening. Reduced restaurant demand directly lowers the tip income that many service workers rely on to supplement their base salaries. A sudden drop in corporate events, conferences, and airport transfers places immediate financial pressure on independent contractors, drivers, and logistics suppliers. These are the workers who absorb the immediate shock of reduced operating hours. Workers saw their earning potential vanish overnight. This creates employment risk that can quickly affect remittance-dependent households across the globe, from South Asia to the Philippines. The luxury system is maintained by an enormous, flexible workforce whose income depends entirely on high utilization rates and constant tourist churn. When the flow of international visitors stops, that workforce faces immediate uncertainty. They cannot simply work remotely or wait out the disruption with large financial reserves. Their economic survival requires the daily arrival of wide-body jets and the continuous swiping of credit cards. The massive glass buildings record the financial loss over quarters through corporate balance sheets and quarterly occupancy reports. But the workers can feel the economic contraction in the very next weekly schedule. The human cost of the airspace crisis was a quiet erasure of income, hidden behind the maintained facades of the luxury towers. The disruption did not become a permanent state of collapse. As the regional geopolitical situation stabilized, the United Arab Emirates systematically restored normal air traffic operations. Dubai airports increased capacity, passenger processing resumed its highly efficient rhythm, and international airlines returned to their standard routes. Restaurant activity picked up, hotel demand began returning, and the broader business environment demonstrated impressive operational resilience. The physical infrastructure had survived the shock, and the city proved it could quickly restart its massive economic engine. But operational recovery is not the same as structural immunity. Air traffic, passenger processing, and hotel demand recovered because the immediate military threat subsided. What could not be reversed immediately was the precedent of direct disruption. The psychological and strategic landscape of regional operations had fundamentally changed. Airlines had to integrate new, stringent risk assessments for regional flight corridors, recognizing that airspace could close with little warning and strand valuable assets. Global corporations with regional headquarters in the city had to factor new insurance calculations and evacuation planning into their operational budgets. International investors and premium travelers were left with a permanent memory of restricted airspace, canceled departures, and intercepted debris. The illusion of absolute insulation, built over decades of careful marketing and genuine stability, had been broken. Dubai repaired the physical interruption with remarkable speed. It proved the competence of its crisis management and the underlying durability of its physical assets. But it could not erase the historical fact that the interruption had occurred. The city had crossed a threshold, moving from a destination that felt completely untouchable to one that required active risk management. The events beginning on February 28, 2026, proved that Dubai's economic firewall is not impenetrable. The city restored much of the activity that made it successful, proving the durability of its physical and operational infrastructure. The airport still functions as a global crossroads, and the luxury hotels still offer unparalleled service. But Dubai did not return to the exact same strategic position it occupied before the conflict. The city can still fill its aircraft, its hotels, and its glass towers. What it can no longer do is ask the world to believe that its economic insulation has never been breached. The events exposed how much its luxury economy depended on conditions it could not independently control. The physical damage was limited, but the economic interruption revealed the rigid fixed costs hidden behind the five-star image. The anti-luxury lesson is not that Dubai's skyline was fake, or that its economic success was an illusion. It is that even the most expensive and advanced skyline in the world could not protect the continuous international flow that made it profitable. The city built a flawless engine, but it did not control the fuel supply. When the fuel was temporarily cut off, the machine did not break, but its vulnerabilities were exposed for the entire world to measure. This documentary analyzes verified reporting and economic data relating to the 2026 Gulf conflict. It contains non-graphic discussion of military events and their economic consequences. This video is based on publicly available reporting, official tourism data, aviation figures, and hospitality market analysis. Confirmed events and measured results are clearly distinguished from analytical interpretation. Longer-term conclusions represent analysis, not confirmed predictions. The video does not claim that Dubai has permanently collapsed or that future outcomes are certain. Archival footage, illustrative graphics, and any reconstructed visuals are identified where applicable. How do you think international cities should balance luxury infrastructure with the reality of regional geopolitical risk? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you found this investigation valuable, subscribe to the channel for more analysis on the systems that shape our world.